This is Jeremy Martin, Vice President for Energy and Sustainability at the Institute of the Americas, and welcome to our La Jolla Energy Conference Curtain Raiser interview, where we delve a bit deeper into some of the key areas and topics that are part of the conference agenda. And at this year's conference, we're again pleased to be joined and have with us Environmental Resources Management, better known as ERM. They've been a key supporter and sponsor of the La Jolla Conference for many years. And as we see on the screen, we have a new logo at ERM. And today I'm delighted to speak with Amy McDonald, a partner at ERM's office in Houston, Texas. Hello, Amy.
Hi, Jeremy. So good to be with you today. Yes, we thought after 50 years it was time for a refresh. So
yeah, the new logo is pretty sharp.
Debuted logo. Thanks.
I look forward to some new logo swag here at the La Jolla Conference.
Of course. Of course.
October 11th and 12th, I neglected to mention the dates of this year's La Jolla Conference that we're raising the curtain on. So Amy is the global industry lead for diversified energy, which at ERM includes traditional oil and gas companies and the low carbon operations they are moving towards. I think, though, it may be best if you, Amy, take a minute and share with us just exactly what diversified energy means at ERM and exactly sort of what your work is in regards to this topic.
Yeah, happy to share, Jeremy. So, at ERM, we're about 8,500 and growing specialists focused exclusively on sustainability and how to build a more sustainable future. And in my role, I do have the great honor of leading our diversified energy business. And the way my role works is that I spend my time really engaging with clients to understand their needs, particularly in the energy transition, and innovate with them solutions that combine our deep subject matter expertise and integrate with their own teams, assets, and resources to help accelerate progress along each company's unique low carbon journey. And, I was reflecting and thinking about the excellent gathering of brilliant minds that you will be having in La Jolla.
Well,
and I was reminded of when I stepped into this role, I was reading at the time Dan Yergin's latest book called The Map. And, Dan's famous, he'd spent decades in the oil and gas industry, wrote the prize. And I found it fascinating that his latest work was focused on the intersection of climate, energy, and nations, geopolitics. And the way that those three things play out over the coming years is going to be so critical for the shape that this energy transition takes. And so then when I think of the audience that you have and the agenda that you've set in La Jolla, I think it's a fascinating opportunity to bring together that energy, climate, and geopolitical combination to all work together towards a lower carbon, more sustainable future. Excited to be with you today.
God, I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm glad we're recording this. Now I have the talking points of La Jolla Conference, enlightening the path to transformation. Absolutely. And it's great because we have that agenda, as you very nicely synthesized, that does indeed, climate is a driver. What's the role of this hemisphere, this region in the broader debate around energy transition, energy security, and meeting climate objectives and climate goals. So no, indeed, your work and the work of ERM is clearly interwoven in so much of what we're going to talk about here at the conference. We're calling our first two sessions the big debates, and one of them is the topic of net zero. There's been a lot of conversation and debate indeed over the last few years of the role of oil and gas companies. You mentioned just exactly what your work and your focus on oil and gas companies with regard to combating climate change. Some have set very clear-eyed objectives in terms of net zero, certain dates, certain targets for net zero. But on the other hand, there have also been a lot of accusations of sort of greenwashing, some people like to call it, or talking more or more rhetoric than per se action from the companies. So where do you see things today? And I guess the main point I'd like to get into is, are oil and gas, our international oil and gas companies really moving toward lower carbon and net zero solutions?
Great question and challenge, I think, for the industry. It's certainly been a dynamic past. I think today and looking into the future, it's likely to be even more dynamic. You're correct. Many of these companies have made clear net zero ambitions. And what we're seeing is with the larger companies, especially, there's greater clarity on those roadmaps. So how are they actually going to achieve net zero? And then as I look towards smaller, mid-tier and small tier companies, we are seeing an increase in the number of announcements, and then again, that commitment to transparency along the transition. So I think the direction of travel is clear. I think the maturity and the path by which each company will go will be unique, because so much of the decarbonization journey depends on their own operations, locations, resources. What we see as well with these companies is that they're all taking a bit of a two-pronged approach. So one is, how do they decarbonize their own assets and products, as well as then how do they pivot and leverage their skill sets in new and different ways to decarbonize other industries or neighbors. And so we're seeing that both that technology shift and then also that corporate strategies shift. So these companies certainly are leaning into a lower carbon, more sustainable future. It's just taking different shapes and forms depending on both corporation and location.
It's a great point. I mean, I think we could, agree that sort of Western European and companies have taken probably a little bit more forward-leaning posture to some of what you just got done mentioning. What about investment? Just sort of before we moved into more technology, are those net zero pathways bringing with it the requisite or the kind of investments and commitments of investment by those companies?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of billions of dollars being quoted in all of the investor presentations about the commitment to making this change. Again, I think that's something that is just going to continue to play out over time. There's a good amount of research showing the increasing trend of commitments in this space. And we're seeing companies form entire new business divisions that are focused on decarbonization. So I know that we'll get to technology in just a moment, but as far as corporate investment, and then I think also the attractiveness of external investors, things like maturing policy regimes that make it clear about the economics and tax benefits of some of these lower carbon technologies are beginning to let the investor community play a more active role with greater certainty on the return on their investment. So finance is certainly evolving, but the numbers are trending up.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk about IRA, but I won't put you too much on the spot with that. But let's talk about technology, which of course is absolutely part of IRA. It's trying to de-risk technology, because I think when we talk about these net zero pathways and you talk about some of the scenarios and commitments companies are making, there are carbon capture commitments, there are hydrogen, there are a whole slew of technologies, I think, that are going to be crucial to meeting or perhaps trying to meet those commitments along those pathways. So the question that I feel like we always are facing is the viability, the commercial viability, the scalability. When it comes to hydrogen and when it comes to carbon capture, I mean, are they commercially viable at this stage?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say in some cases, yes. So
yes,
I think it really, I wish it were all cases, but this really comes down to the resources that are available and the energy that's needed. Hydrocarbons are an incredibly energy rich, energy dense form of energy. And so as we look towards either transitioning away from that or finding ways to use it with lower emissions, it really comes down to the availability of those technologies. The IRA and many others have done studies on the technology that's going to be required for a successful transition. And I think there's a long way to go. Yeah. So then it becomes about how do we incentivize new technology development, and then how do we make it economic to deploy at scale, which brings us back to policy. So, this is largely going to be a policy-driven transition. We've got to have the policy frameworks in place to enable these technologies to succeed, in addition to additional innovation that's needed within each of these technologies. So it's a very case-by-case basis, I would say, really subject to the local jurisdiction and the technology that's available with the resources that exist there. I will say also, last thought on this is that we're seeing new value chains form. So when we think of, for example, green hydrogen, it's dependent upon a renewable energy source. And so we're starting to see lines blur between industries. Critical minerals are going to play a big part of renewables. So suddenly you have this multi-industry value chain that's all dependent upon one another, not just from a technology standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. If any piece of that value chain is no longer commercially viable, it has a ripple effect. And so we're starting to see this much more comprehensive view about how this infrastructure development is going to take place largely driven by those factors.
No, it's a great point. I mean, and we always have talked about sort of in the sector, energy is a long-term business, and it's complex and long-term. It requires stable certainty, particularly in the regulatory and legal environment and policy environment. So all of those things I think you've emphasized is 100%. It seems like right now they're depending on the jurisdiction, there's varying levels of policy direction, and again, you mentioned a while ago the geopolitics and sort of the intersection of politics and in policy making, and that indeed, when you see changes in government, you see the changes in policy, and ergo changes in how you drive towards these net zero commitments. So I think the point is it's complex, it's getting more complex, and we continue to value ERMs. Like you said, you're over 8,500 partners or employees strong, and you're long-standing support of our event here at La Jolla, and the subject matter expertise you bring. And I really appreciate you taking time to chat with us today. Any final parting thoughts? Anything you want to convey to the audience?
Absolutely. I'm looking at this with great optimism and excitement. Yeah. I think that there's never been a more exciting time for us to come together and have the opportunity to make such an impact on our planet and our people. So I wake up every day excited to have the opportunity to provide some type of input to this amazing change that's happening right before us. And I thank you for bringing together so many different thought leaders to work together and find ways to collaborate to accelerate the progress that we're all after.
Thank you. Here's to optimism. Thank you very much. Let's end on an optimistic note. There are challenges. You've highlighted many of them. It's going to be bumpy. The road's going to be bumpy. There's been lots of essays about the bumpy energy transition, no doubt. But optimism. Thank you so much, Amy McDonald, partner at ERM, our conference supporter and sponsor. Great to talk to you today.
Thanks, Jeremy. Take care.